The following media content is intended to only be an educational reference guide and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice from your doctors. While KCWM and Rose Sparrow Productions adhere to strict self-set guidelines for perinatal and parental practices, any advice, instructions, or information found within this content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should always research these subjects for yourself and make decisions based on all the information available to you, or seek the advice of your medical professional with any questions you have regarding a medical condition. The subject matter of this media content may not be suitable for all ages. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Now sit back, listen in, and join us for today's episode of Birthopolis.
Hi, welcome to Bumpaholics with KCWM, Keeping Community Women's Ministry. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, MeWe,
Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest.
We're everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm Jamie Mackey, and I am the Director of Technology with KCWM, and here with me today is Cindy Rogan.
Hi, I'm the Director of Administration at KCWM, and a mom of 3.
So, we're here to talk about your birth stories today.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about your children.
Yeah. So I have 3. My oldest is 20, my daughter is 16, and my youngest son is 14. It's been a long time since I've been pregnant. And each of them had very different births. Very different pregnancies, just nothing textbook at all.
So, let's start with your first child.
Yeah.
And how did you first find out that you were pregnant?
Well, I was young. I was only 17 when I found out I was pregnant with him. And, they talk about implantation pain. And I hadn't missed my period yet. I had no real reason to think I was pregnant. But I can remember the moment I knew. I walked in my front door and I felt that cramp and that pain. And I knew. My mom was in the kitchen and, Mom, I'm so sorry. I love you. But I remember going down and I was like, oh no, I'm pregnant. And then I continued on with my day as though nothing had happened because I couldn't let anybody know that anything had happened. Yeah. A couple weeks later, I was late. I took the test, had a little bit of a breakdown, found out I was pregnant, proceeded to have to tell my parents and all of that fun stuff that you have to do when that happens to you.
Yeah.
Or not happens to you. I just was naive and didn't think it was going to happen. I guess I didn't understand the birds and the bees quite yet. But yeah, that's how I found out I was pregnant with my first. My second, we had actually been trying for a little while and then had given up. We just didn't think it was going to happen. So we decided to stop trying for a little bit. And when we stopped trying, about 3 months later, about the time I was like, okay, great. We're just going to have one kid. We're not going to have any more. I found out I was pregnant. And then my third, I was adamant that I was not going to get pregnant again. I was done having children. There was no way on earth I was going to have any more children. And out of the blue, while breastfeeding and while on birth control, I found out I was pregnant with number 3. So if that child does not have a point for being here, I am very mistaken because I'm pretty sure he has a pretty big mission in life. Yeah. But that's how I found out I was pregnant with all 3. Each one in their own time and each one in their own story. So
yeah. So how did you know when you were in labor?
With my first, I was extremely early. We were actually out of town on a vacation, kind of a weekend away. And I was getting in the shower that morning and I went to step in the shower and my water broke. Just out of the blue, nothing else was going on, no contractions. This was back in 2000, and cell phones were just kind of not really a thing, especially not for 2 teenagers who had literally just gotten married 5 days before. And so the way that the place that we were staying at was set up, there were cabins, and the only phone on property was up the hill about half a mile. So I went out and I told my new husband, I said, hey, I'm pretty sure my water broke. And he panicked because he was laying in bed and had no idea what was going on. And I said, well, why don't you pack the car and I'm going to go call my mom. And so I walked myself up this hill, up a dirt road, up half a mile, because I don't know why I didn't just take the car, but it seems silly to me to take a car for half a mile. And I got to the top of the hill and I got inside and I was like, I just wanted to know if I could use your phone. They were like, honey, you can't. It's long distance. You can't make a phone call. And I was like, well, I think I'm in labor. I think my water broke. And all of a sudden, this entire room full of older people, and if you ever see this, people down in Texas who happened to be in that room, I am so sorry that I was so nonchalant about it, because I really and truly had no idea that it was a big deal. To me, it was just my water broke. I'm in labor. Okay. Now we need to do the next step. And they panicked. Let me use the phone. I called my mom and she was like, well, honey, you probably need to call your midwife and let her know. So I called my midwife, who was just like, well, you haven't had anything going on. Go ahead and head home, take a shower, give me a call when you get home. So that's what I did. And I just really wasn't worried about it. I just sat on a diaper for the drive that just happened to have been in the car from my pack of diapers. And I sat on the diaper for the 3 hours drive home. And that's how I went into labor with my first one. But yeah, I mean, it was just really out of the blue and very calm once we got home. My mom and my dad came over to our apartment and my mom was panicking and I was just kind of like, well, we probably need to go to the hospital or I'll call her. And I was like, but she just said to give her a call when we got here. And so I called her and she's like, well, honey, I don't really think anything's going on, because she really didn't think my water had broken. I mean, I was 17 and it was I had just turned 18 and it was my first pregnancy and she probably thought I'd peed myself. Yeah. So she was like, I'm going into a movie with my daughter right now. I'll meet you at the hospital, take a shower, get your bag packed, just in case this is a real thing. Because I wasn't having any contractions at this point. Nothing was happening. So we went to the hospital. She got there and lo and behold, my water had broken. Still no contractions. Nothing was happening. So, but that was the start of labor with him.
All right. So what happened once you got there and determined that you were in labor?
So, we talk a lot about the waterfall of interventions. His was textbook waterfall of interventions. I got to the hospital. My water had broken. Especially back then, you were not allowed to go a certain amount of time over having your water broken. And so, water broken, no contractions. They had me on Pitocin. They had me up walking. They had me trying to do some stuff. So we started with walking. There's some interesting pictures of me trying to walk around. There's one picture of me in this really awful robe that I don't remember who bought for me, over the hospital gown. And I was pushing a wheelchair that my baby sister, who was like 2, is sitting in. While I was trying, I don't know if it was in labor or right after I'd had him, but it's one of my favorite funny, not attractive pictures of me. But I remember doing some walking around, and then they put me on Pitocin, and I started having contractions, but nothing was really happening. And then they gave me Benadryl to help me sleep through the night. And I told them, I was like, if you give me Benadryl, it's going to knock me out. And they were like, no, we're just going to give you a little bit. Nothing will happen. Well, it completely stopped the contractions. Oh, yeah. I think I made it to a whole 1.5 centimeters. And so the next morning around 11, we'd hit the 24-hour mark and then some, and nothing was progressing. I don't think I made it ever to 3 centimeters dilated. And we ended up having to have a C-section. And he was about 8 weeks early. So he was born and went straight to the NICU. And then I know I got to see him a couple of times, but I was sent home without him. And then ended up with a really bad infection. We had a really rough start first few weeks there. So, yeah. But it was, we made it.
So what was that like, having a baby in the NICU?
I don't have a lot of memory of it. I wish that I did. I know that his dad was in there a lot with him. My parents were in there a lot with him. His grandmother, my ex-mother-in-law, was in there a lot with him. I only got to go see him in the NICU once. Because after I was released from the hospital, I was then readmitted the same day, and was in a different unit with an infection and wasn't able to see him for the next 2 weeks.
That's really tough.
It was a very rough start, but the nurses did everything that they could, and my midwife was really working to try and make sure that we still had a good breastfeeding relationship and everything. Even though we started 2 weeks late, it was still successful, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So
you had a midwife at 17?
I did. My mom had a birth center birth with her, but it was the last birth center birth allowed in the area. 20 years ago, home births were not allowed in Texas. Or if they were, it was very, very limited. They definitely were not allowed in our county. And so my midwife, and she had been really pushed out of being able to even do her birth center births. And so she was now having to operate in the hospital. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I probably would have had him at home and probably had a much less intervention.
Yeah.
Had we been able to be in a birth center or that kind of an environment. Looking back, I can see a lot of things that if now with my education, had I known, we would have had a very different experience and probably would not have ended up in C-section. But as it was, then with my daughter, I found out I was pregnant, and we ended up with a lot of complications during her pregnancy. So, I was on bed rest. We had a subchorionic hemorrhage. We had a placental abruption. We had some pretty rough. We had a really rough start to her pregnancy. Like the first, I would say 4 months were really bad. But,
yeah. So, how did you handle that pregnancy?
A lot of support. I had some really good friends, and really, my family really rallied around me for that one. I had a 3-year-old. I'm sorry, he didn't turn 4 until right after she was born. A 3-year-old running around, but I had a couple of good friends. We ended up actually moving in with them just so they could help out for a little while because I wasn't really able to take care of him, and I really couldn't handle things the way that I needed to. And so they were there through all of that.
That's awesome that you had someone that could do that for you.
Yes, it was amazing. And then with her, when I went into labor, she was actually a little bit more textbook, but she wasn't very kind about it. She decided to start about 1 a.m. I had been having some Braxton Hicks and had actually been into the hospital a few days before that thinking I was in labor, and then things just never really went anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so about 1 o'clock in the morning I woke up and I was like, whoa, those are kind of hurting. And now remember, I hadn't experienced contractions with my first one very much. I had no idea what to expect. And so I'm like, oh, that hurts. And then her dad got up and he had to be at work that morning at 4 a.m. And so I was like, just keep your phone. By now we, thank goodness, had cell phones. I was like, just keep your phone close by because this might be it. It might not be it. But these are kind of regular. And so he went off to work, and I woke up the friend that was living with us a couple hours later. I think it was about 6 a.m. But I was like, hey, I think these might actually be contractions. And so we started timing them, and then we called my mom and let her know, and she came on over, and at about 11 a.m. I was like, okay, I think we need to go in. They're getting strong. Yeah. Now, keep in mind, I was also the one who was trying to walk up and down stairs. I was doing laps around my house. I was not going to let these contractions stop. She was coming out. We get to the hospital and they checked me and they were like, well, we're going to keep you for a little bit. We'll just kind of observe you, but you're only at 3 centimeters. We probably have a little bit of time to wait. And so I got up and I started walking laps around that hospital and came back and sat down, and they were getting the bed already. Yeah. And the nurse she was in the middle of telling me that if I hadn't progressed to at least 4 centimeters, they were sending me home. Mm-hmm. And she was like, so you should probably just start getting some things together. I really don't think you're progressing that much. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I just kind of sat there and stared at them. And I looked at my mom and I looked at the nurse and I asked my mom to come here. I was like, I think I peed on myself. And she just kind of looked at me funny. She was like, well, why don't you get up and go to the bathroom? And so she helped me up, and my water had broken. And my water had broken. Like, there was no mistake. There was no, my water had broken. You guys, I was so embarrassed, and I kept apologizing because it was just, like, everywhere. Those big gushes that they talk about, that they show in the movie, that everyone's like, that's not realistic. That's not how it really happens. That is how it happened. There was a little bit of trauma during that birth. Right after that, my midwife irritated my cervix, which, if you don't know what that means, I would look it up. I don't really want to go into it in case someone does have some trauma around that. I know that I personally do. Kind of took me off the bed with some pain there. So but up until that, my contractions had been pretty manageable. Mm-hmm. But after that, it was pretty hard. But yeah, I mean, still a hospital birth. I did end up getting an epidural with her. We got to the hospital about 11:30 a.m. And I was adamant that she not be born that day. I was convinced, I was convinced that she had to be born prior to midnight that night. It's really funny, the things that pregnant women get into their head and how powerful that is during labor. Yeah. I was adamant that she not be born, that she had to be born before midnight, because I thought that it was April 12th. And I did not want a child born on the 13th. I don't know where it came from. It wasn't something that I had ever thought of prior to labor. But right then, in that moment, she could not be born after or before midnight, because she couldn't be born on April 13th. And I was really, I was holding myself back. It is amazing the power that we have. I was really holding myself back, and my mom finally asked me, like, I wasn't progressing. Yeah. And my mom finally asked, she's like, baby, why are you so adamant that she has to be born before midnight? And I remember her really clearly asking me that. And so I told her, I said, she can't be born on April 13th because she'll have a Friday the 13th birthday. She probably would love that now. She would love that. And she just looked at me, she's like, baby, today's the 13th. And it was like, all of a sudden, this whole gush of just release came over me. It was like I could finally have this child. She was born at 12:06 a.m. on April 14th. I got exactly what I wanted. Other than the epidural, we didn't really have any other interventions. I had a small tear with her, but other than that, everything was pretty natural. And she was the only birth that I experienced that rush of hormones when they first hand the baby to you, and you get that rush of, this is the most beautiful baby in the world. She's gorgeous. She's perfect. And she was just perfect. That was that birth.
Oh, yeah. So lovely.
I know. And she was a VBAC, which was amazing. Yeah. Like, everyone had told me that I would have to have a C-section, and back in 2004, that was, VBACs were even more rare than they are now. But I had told my doctor that if she told me I had to have a VBAC, I was having an unassisted birth at home. And that didn't go over very well. So
you tell them you're the boss.
Right. She said if I had to have a C-section that, I told them if I had to have a C-section that I was not coming to the hospital. And so they said they would let me try for a VBAC. And so I had a VBAC. You always have the right to consent. Always.
Yes.
Speaking of right to consent, my third one, I was adamant was coming out, and I insisted on him being induced. So, as a doula, that's not something you're supposed to admit, right?
Oh, I mean, educated choices.
Right. So for Ethan, I was in labor for a long time with him. I was walking around at 4 centimeters for about 6 weeks at least. And they would keep telling me, it's going to be any day now. It's going to be any day. That baby is coming out. And we would have contractions every day. And they were painful. And they were exhausting. And I had a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. Mm-hmm. And I was tired. And I was big.
Goes to show that that dilation is just a number.
It is, which is why you don't have to consent to cervical checks.
Yes.
Isn't that a great thing to know? You don't have to consent to anything you don't want. Had I known that I didn't need to consent to cervical checks back then, I probably wouldn't have, but that's because I'd figured out how to do them myself. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Please, don't do that.
Do not DIY cervical checks.
Do not DIY. So as with him, as that kept going forward, finally it's a week before my due date, and I had been early with my other two, so I had expected him to be early, especially for how long I felt like I'd been in labor, forever. And so I went in to see my doctor, and she was like, well, we'll schedule an induction for 2 weeks from now. I'm going to be on vacation next week. And I was like, I love you, but I'm having him next week. He's due on the 4th. I am willing to go to Monday on the 5th because I know that the 4th is a Sunday. And she was like, well, we probably, should wait. And I was like, or we can have him because... And y'all, I've already said I've threatened unassisted birth at home before. I promise I would never do anything to actually hurt my child, but pregnancy hormones make you say some really crazy things. And I had researched how to break my own water. Not a good idea. Do not do this. KCAWM does not condone unassisted births or any kind of medical intervention unassisted. Pregnancy hormones had me crazy. I probably wouldn't have actually done it. I would have chickened out or someone would have talked me out of it. But I did threaten that to my doctor at the time. And so she scheduled the induction for Monday morning, first thing in the morning. I went in. They broke my water. They started Pitocin like they do. And my doctor, like I said, was on vacation. And I absolutely adore her. The midwife that I'd had with my previous 2 births was no longer delivering. Like I said, there were a lot of issues with that in that area, and they didn't really like midwives at the time. So she was now teaching, and the doctor who came in, who was the replacement for my doctor, who came in that day was awful. He was probably a very kind man. But after he left, I said I never wanted him to touch me again. And a few minutes later, in walks my midwife from my previous 2 births. She was like, oh my gosh, I saw your name on the board. I can't believe you're here. And she goes, if you can have him, she said, I'll take over your care today. If you can have him by 5 o'clock, I'll be your doctor. I'll take care of things. Yes. She's absolutely phenomenal. She's still practicing too. So she's delivered all 3 of mine and my sister. She's amazing. So she comes, she's like, but, you're just starting an induction. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. You're dilated, but nothing's really happening. We'll see. I'm sure she had no intention of actually delivering that child. And I said, okay, he'll be here by 5. And he was born at 4:58 p.m.
The power of the mind again.
It is amazing. The power of what your mind can do during labor and delivery is really phenomenal. And I'm a strong believer that, that is really what controls a lot of labor for most women.
Yeah.
And it's those fears that hold you back, but it's also that confidence in what you can do and in what your body's going to do that really determines how your birth goes. So,
yeah, that is prime example of that.
Yes. So he was born at 4:58 p.m. on the dot. It's been a big joke. It's definitely his personality too. Kind of drag things along and then get it done.
All right. All very amazing birth stories. Every birth story is so unique and special. And I thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for listening to Bumpaholics by Keeping Community Women's Ministry. And be sure to follow us on all of the social media.
We look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you for hanging out with us. We loved having you here. Don't forget to hit that like button because we deserve it. Leave a comment to let us know why. And since you enjoy this video so much, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. While you're at it, click the notification icon so you're alerted to all of our future content. Your participation and constructive feedback helps us grow and shapes our community that you can be a part of. Be sure to follow us on all of our socials so you can stay in the loop for upcoming videos, live events, fundraisers, and Patreon goodies. As you know, the details will be found in the description below. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to see you in our next video.